Hello. When I came to build the top for my wardrobe, I knew I wanted a live edge slab. Unfortunately, the slabs I could find that was 12 feet long and 18-inch wide were around €1,000. And because this wardrobe build is built to a budget, I had to look elsewhere for the timber. So eventually, in my local builder's merchant, I found this knot-free pine parquet floor. Before I get too carried away and build the top, I first need to build a subtop, one that will pack the new top of the melamine faced chipboard and allow the doors to open freely. Once I get round to the doors, that is. To make this subtop, I ripped down some cheap parquet floor. This parquet floor I bought for the walls of the barn workshop, but it cupped as soon as I opened the packaging, so it's been sat on my timber storage shelf for a few weeks. A 2-inch piece was screwed to the front and a 2-inch piece was screwed to the back. And then I filled in between with some small noggins to create a ladder frame. Because this parquet floor has no knots, it was slightly more expensive than the parquet floor I had bought for the barn workshop. And because the nights are now damp, I kept the parquet floor in the room where it was to be used, so it became acclimatised to its new environment. This top will use 6 pieces of this 2-metre long parquet floor. And 2 pieces will be ripped straight down the middle to form the rear 2 pieces and also the double thickness of the front edge. The wall to the rear of the wardrobe, or actually the underside of the roof, is not quite straight, so the rear 2 boards need scribing. So I took my measurements and made a sketch of what I needed to achieve and took the 2 pieces outside and ripped them down the centre of the board, which creates the back piece and the overlap to the front edge. Now you may notice I've set the saw to a slight bevel, and this is because I'm trying to cheat the system when it comes to scribing. If I have a point on a splayed edge, I've got much less material to remove during the scribing process. And then, to make it even easier, I freehanded the worst part of the scribe to remove yet more stock. I also needed to scribe the corners around 2 quadrant beads in the roof. And here I'm doing something that my old foreman used to tell me off for, using a pen to mark the timber. And the last piece of cutting I did just before I lost the light was to rip the tongues and the grooves off the pieces that would form the front edge. Now, not only was I trying to cheat the system with the scribe to the rear edge, but also trying to cheat the system to scribe around the quadrant beads. And here I'm cutting most of the timber away at the back, so I'm only scribing a few millimetres around the quadrant. I don't know whether this is genius or I'm just a madman, but it may be the latter when you see how I wear my ear defenders. Now there's nothing like a nice chilling Sunday morning, and I spent this Sunday morning scribing my timbers to the rear of the top and around the moulding. Scribing is not something I do very regularly, so it was just nice to take my time and make sure I did a good job. For some reason I always find planing with my block plane very satisfying. You can see why I decided to cut the splay on the back of the boards. I have much less stock to remove for this scribe. And once I was happy everything fitted correctly, I just gave everything a final sanding. The 4 rear pieces were now glued down to the top of the subframe. I can now loosely lay down my front 2 pieces and then glue the two offcuts from the back to the underside of the front piece to create the mock 40mm slab. Now here is the inspiration for my mock live edge. This oak table I made from firewood a couple of years ago, and I also made a sample from that Parquet softwood parquet floor. And now the front of the top had dried, I could detach it from the wardrobe and take it into the small barn workshop for the next stage. And here is where it all started to go wrong. Firstly, I needed to mark a reference line. This would denote the front of the doors whenever I make them. And then I had to select a tool that would cut the wonkiest line. Now, which tool comes to mind when cutting wonky lines? Of course, the jigsaw. Now, if any of you said, well, JP, all tools cut wonky in your hand, feel free to leave now. My first cut with the jigsaw was just a long, plumb cut, just to get that wonky feel to the edge. Because this piece is almost 12 feet long, I had to move it around slightly and stick it out of the window. I would never been able to do this in the small loft workshop. To start to make the live edge, I first of all moved the jigsaw over to cut around about 30 degrees. Or at least I did once I'd figured the mechanism out. Now, can anyone spot the pending disaster? I thought a bit of sanding would help my cause. Up a section of the top with some old timber, some of the stuff that bends quite easily before I bought this. And because I bought this better quality, the grooves in the bottom are actually more frequent and closer together. So I'm actually breaking through into the grooves. And I thought at first it was only the top piece, but actually as I've tried to sculpt it, I broke through into the bottom piece as well. So that's quite annoying. Now there's always a fix, but I think because it's getting late now, I think I'm going to take this back in the house and put it back on the unit and just have a think overnight what my next course of action is. I quite like the shape, I quite like the feel of it, but obviously I need to get rid of these grooves. And the more I dig into the top and sand the top one out, the more the one on the bottom is. Okay, so 4 days and an Amazon delivery later, here was my solution. These wood sculpting angle grinder blades. Okay, so this is going to be purely experimental. I've never used one of those discs before. See, that distance between there and there is the thickness of my cupboard doors. That's kind of a 5mm overlap to give me a little safety buffer. Now I don't want to take anything off from this bottom point, but I can take off as much as I want up to here to get rid of this groove and also get rid of the groove that's in the top part, which is over here. I need to get rid of that groove, so I can take as much as I want this way. And the idea is I'm looking for a live edge effect which is totally ununiformal all the way down. Let's have a go and see what mess I make of it. So I don't really know what to expect. One's concave and one's flat. Starting with the flat disc, and I'm not quite sure how much it's going to take off. If I'm going to chew through the whole thing in seconds or I'll be here all day. But I'll find out in a matter of seconds. Okay, so it is quite fierce, and already I've opened up and then chewed through that groove, so that's gone. Now I've got too much of a bevel on there. I don't really like that, but that's okay. I'm happy that if I continue that all the way up there, and then I'll have another go with the other disc and see how the other disc sculptures it, and then I'll just have to finish it with a sander. This one may just let me sculpture into it a little bit. I mean, it's starting to look like, well, it's starting to look like it came from a tree. It's a little bit like using electric hand planer or using a planer. The faster you go, or the less ripples you get per inch. So if you go nice and slow, you get a relatively smooth finish. Because if you put something through a surface planer really quick at high speed, you get less planer marks per inch, but they're more pronounced. So I've moved to the other blade, which is more of a convex shape, so I'm guessing this scallop it out. I'm sure this is probably a blade that you would use if you were making a chair seat, for example, and you wanted to make it fit your ass. This particular section, I've still got a little groove there, so I'm going to see if I can get in there and concave that, and then maybe just dress up some of this so it's not. Actually, that surprised me. It's nowhere near as fierce as I thought this one would be. Well, I'm going to call that it. It's actually a very satisfying thing to do, regardless of what this looks like. Chewing through wood with them cutters is very nice. So I'm going to get the sander on that. I'm going to have to start with something like a 60 grit and then just work my way through. Amongst this grinding and sanding session, I also needed to fill in the two grooves at the end of the top. Then I sanded and I sanded until the sun went down and I lost the daylight. But the next day I was really happy in what I had achieved. The actual edge does look like a live edge slab. So the front piece can now be glued in place along with the rest of the top. There was a couple of small holes in the piece that need filling, so I used some CA glue and then, when that had dried, just gave it a sand. To finish this top, I'm just giving it some coats of quick drying clay varnish. That way it will match the finish on the Velux window above the top. In total I gave it 3 coats, let it dry overnight, wire wooled it down and then gave it a further coat. So what did this top cost? Well, the 6 pieces of good quality parquet, the 2 pieces of less quality I used as the undertop, and the tin of varnish cost a grand total of €83, which means the total so far spent on this wardrobe build is €176.56. And I'm really happy how this top turned out. It looks really chunky and it looks like a proper live edge. I hope you enjoyed this project. If so, give me a thumbs up and consider subscribing to the channel. And until next week, bye.